Hi everyone, how are you doing?
Hello. Sorry, had the headphones off for a minute.
How are you doing?
Good.
That's good.
Let me know what you think of the resume stuff for the other class, because I tried to do something new, but I never feel that creative when it comes to stuff like that. So I
Okay.
was down to the wire thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna take this week to go through your stuff for CIS 200 and then also my other classes. I'm teaching 5 this semester
Ooh,
along with finishing some of my projects. It's a little
oi.
crazy. But yeah, so it's always a lot of stuff at the beginning of the semester, like, meetings and things like that. But
Mhm.
yeah, I tend to, I plan to go through everything this week, possibly starting tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah. No, we can't hear you, Chris.
Not yet. His audio is connecting, it shows.
Yeah, he asked if he asked in the chat.
Okay, so we have a couple minutes if everyone would like to check out Canvas and go through downloading the notes and the assignments. I'm finishing out the lab. I wanted to touch base with you today to see what kind of system you're using, so that way we can properly set up the lab. But um, I don't want to use Cisco Viral because it uses it makes you pay. But I'll be right back. Let me grab a drink of water real quick. Hold on.
Kiki.
Okay, so we have a minute. Some of us are joining. Maybe the others will. Okay, so this is week 2. We are moving on to automation in Python this week. And so um, I hope that you are using either Windows PC or Mac OS or Linux. Sorry, because if you are using Chromebook, I'm going to try to do minimal installation and virtual machine, but because we're doing remote education with online learning, it's best to use virtual machine and some of the simulator with this class. I been asking about, I just had a meeting last Friday with the deans, and I asked about checking out equipment and they haven't given me a definite answer, um, because they are allowing some of the classes on campus with social distancing and stuff like that. But we have to take precaution measures with COVID-19 still. I haven't gotten vaccinated, and I know that you haven't because of your tier. So we have to work around that, right? So in the meantime, I intend to use GSM3. I know that I've added you onto some LinkedIn group, so that way you can use LinkedIn Learning. It's a free license with the region. That way you have access to tons of resources, and some of this stuff costs money for people, but since we have free license, I encourage you to use it in addition to the course content, right? So it maximize your learning, you know, resources. So let's talk about what we need to do today. I'm going to go ahead and go into screen share. Please let me know if you have questions verbally or put it in the chat, whatever you wish. I will add the video tonight because I have a meeting right after this along with my office hours, so I have to be on 2 laptops in order to do that. Um, and so I will, as soon as I wrap up my CIS 7 tonight, I will push the videos on YouTube and link it to your Canvas, so you can rewatch it if you need to. So the page is there. It's not enabled yet. Once I have the video added, I will enable the page. So for this week, we are going to cover chapter 2, and I want to touch on some of the areas so you can see. We're going to focus first on PExpect, which is the library in Python. PExpect is used for Python 2. PExpect is the library that we can use with Python 3 to automate routers, switches, and cool stuff with API. And I'm so excited because, from here, you can start expanding, right, your Python capability, and touching back on what we've learned in CIS30B. And then we will touch a little bit on Paramiko and Netmiko. These are the libraries that will automate some of the low-level networking devices. This is helpful in network administration. These libraries are helpful if you wanted to get into development, integrating automation with API, like for credential login, single sign-on stuff for applications. Awesome stuff, right? But we're going to start at this level, and then we're going to scale out and looking at other libraries and how we would write. Now, the challenge with this is going to be using simulator, so be patient with it. I will work out some of the kinks and rewrite the procedures. Also, it's best if you use a Linux system with Python. If you haven't used Linux, this is a good time to start thinking about Linux virtual machine, and I included that in the notes. You can utilize VirtualBox or VMware Workstation Player, create an Ubuntu machine, and use it to test your program. Otherwise, you're going to run into issues like what we're going to see today with Windows environment and also Mac OS, right? Because Python really is stemmed for developer that's using Linux. Depending on the Linux release that you're using, but Ubuntu is friendly for most part. So you can incorporate and install packages, modules that you need. I'm going to address some of the concern that came up with CIS30B, in that I installed this and this packages, but it's still not working. So we're going to go back to that and see why it's not working. Especially when we left off with tk-enter in CIS30B, which is one of the very few module that we use in that class to incorporate the programming at the basic level. So in the lab, I'm going to walk you through on how to use GSN3. This is it's an open source environment, so it's free, and it's great. It's better than Packet Tracer. When I taught Packet Tracer years back, it was not working as expected. There's a lot of glitch and bugs, and they improved the Packet Tracer. Cisco later released Cisco Viral, which is mainly used as a training tool for a lot of the network administrator or people trying to get Cisco certification. If you have subscription, I encourage you to use it because there are some seamless simulation capability with Cisco appliances. However, it costs between $100 to $150 per year per license. So I had gone back to Region and asked to see if they plan to incorporate this for our programs, and let's see if they have the money to do that. I'm going to meet with the dean after this class. So, and then we're going to look at Python scripting to automate switches and routing. And again, it's best to be tested on Linux systems. So if you're using Windows environment, create a virtual machine. If you're using a Mac OS environment, you can also use virtual machine. And I put that in the notes. So read chapter 2, look at the notes, watch the video if you need to. We're going to complete the assignment today. And then we're going to work on lab 2 in the next session, which is on Wednesday. So with this, any question? Okay. So
yes,
yes, Michelle.
I noticed that there are references to Python 2 in the chapter 2.
Yes,
I don't know if
it's
you
not all Python 2. All the scripts are written in Python 3.
Oh, my question is, if
Yeah.
we run into Python 2 in an environment, is there like a book you would recommend for Python 2 to keep handy in case?
Yes. So if you subscribe to LinkedIn Learning, that the invitation that I sent out, one of the set of videos by Bomdell, he does great tutorials for network administration using Python and automation. He touches on parallel, like he would show you a program and the parallel program. The author for this book, he previously released the older edition where you can find for very cheap or even free via Kindle. Um, he explains it in Python 2.7 or the earlier version. So Packet T has a great set for Python 2, but in any case, I encourage you to read the documentation for the libraries. So for example, today we're going to look at PExpect. The parallel of that, if you look at the documentation, they have recommendation for 2.7 Python, which is expect. So there are some syntax differences when you're working with the library, and then there's some feature that is enabled for 3, but not enabled for 2.7. So in the case where you go into the field and you use Python 2.x, right? The latest is 2.7. What I would recommend is to go to the documentation as resources for the library. They usually have, repository either on GitHub for a lot of these groups that are supporting these libraries, so you can look at the parallel. I will try to find some links and then I'll add a page so that way you can see it on the module in case you ever need reference. Okay, I'll work on that this week. Any other questions? Okay, so yeah, Ray had put in the link for the LinkedIn Learning. So I will continue to add some of the modules that I find would be useful for your courses. And then maybe some certification training stuff on there too. So in this week, we're going to touch on the notes and the assignments for today. Let's start with PExpect. So as you go through chapter 2, there's a lot of emphasis at the beginning about PExpect. And PExpect is the later version that came from Expect library. As the name, what we can do is we can use Python script in order to incorporate and to automate some of the API processes. So PExpect is really designed for spawning child applications. So for example, I wanted to find, right, like at login and plug in the credential for the user. I can use PExpect library for that. In automation for network devices, when you're looking at routers and switches, a lot of the times we have to configure them at the iOS or the OS level for that particular interface. So for example, Cisco have their own iOS, and in that, for after the configuration, it requires you to log into the router to reconfigure or to show status, to access logs, etc., or even security appliance for that matter. We can incorporate this library in our script, and you can run it in shell in order to gather information or access resources for that particular appliance, or even automate the login process, things like that. So PExpect allows you to launch or use the spawn of the child application, or the spawn from the application, which is the child, to control and remove some of the interaction that's required from the human. So imagine if you have hundreds of switches and routers that you have to manage in a data center. We're not going to have time to go through and log into every single one of them. We might not have time to look at access individual router and switch for specific reason. What we can do is we can automate that process through using the library. So some of the services with the process that you can use, with PExpect or expect library would be FTP. If you ever use an FTP website, you have to create a user account, or if they allow anonymous use, you can plug in anonymous as a username. So you can use expect method for that, right? Basically, it's going to seek that criteria, and we can have it send line, we can have it plug in our password, our username, etc. So we can use for FTP. Telnet is old. All administrators are trained to remove Telnet, but back in the day, Telnet allows us to remote to the system through a console, using like command line interface. So we can Telnet into an appliance, a computer, if it's enabled. And then we can also, like I mentioned, use it for login. Low-level network automation is great for that. Now, a lot of times you would see expect library or PExpect being used for FTP or SCP, where that would be more on the security file transfer protocol, in that you can pull and it establishes the session compared to FTP, unless you use, secure FTP. So some of these protocols are supported with the library. So here it talks about that. Now, in order to use the library, you need to install it, okay? You need to bring in the packages, and in command line, you simply do pip install PExpect. Now, what if we wanted to do it in a virtual environment where we are not going to impact the package itself, if in case we need to modify it or we need to utilize it a certain way? I included the notes, and the author mentioned how you can use Python virtual environment. It create an isolated virtual area where the installation will not impact your actual system. Or if you wanted to do it in your system, that's okay too. But installation, I already installed it on this laptop. So if I do pip install, I simply tell it what kind of packet that I wanted to install, right? Package. So what I wanted to install was what PExpect. Now, if you already install it, it would say that it's already been satisfied. If not, it's going to show the status bar on where it goes out, and it's going to pull from the available resources. Now, in order to use it with your IDE, in my case, I'm using Tawny. When you bring in the IDE into the mix here, if you're not using, so in most cases, we have to use some form of text editor, and then we have to use the shell to run the script. Now in IDE like Tawny, what you need to do is go to tools, and you need to select manage packages. So if you're using VS Code or another IDE, make sure that you you manage the configuration for the package. And this is the downfall for the student that were using IDE with pkenter. They installed it, but they couldn't find it when they accessed the IDE. So even though I installed it on my system, some of the IDE would require you to install it with the IDE. So all you have to do is search for the library itself. And as you can see, it finds it here. And all you have to do is click install. I already installed it. So, and you can uninstall a certain library when you don't need it. So here it tells me that it finds the 4.8.0. And this is some information about it in the links. And you can check out the link, the homepage. So you can read more about the documentation, how to use it, what to use it with. And it's very important that you do that when you're programming, right? Refer to documentation before we attempt things, and look at how it's used. So there are examples and things like that through the web page. So once you find it, you simply click install, and then you can find additional packages. So not all the packages are equipped with all IDE. just keep in mind that when you're using the IDE, first thing before you use any library in any language, you got to make sure that you configure it. Even though sometimes it's already installed, you have to, enable certain feature for a certain library. So, and this is a good way to kind of look at what packages you have. So that way you can incorporate the tools from the packages, okay? So here is, here is how to do that. And in the notes, it talks about how to also set up your Python virtual environment. And in the text, it talks about how to set it up with Mac OS or Linux terminal. And if you're using more of a rare release for Linux, it might require, some would require apt-get install, or sudo apt-get install. So depending on the release, so make sure that you check out the version that you use and then see how that will correlate with the commands. And so for the Mac OS, you would tell it Python 3, and then you would do the pip install. And ultimately, we tell it that it's going to be the virtual env. And this is what it's going to try to bring in. So it's going to install that on your system. Once you install it, what you have to do is you have to activate it in order to use it, right? Just like any software tool, we can install it, but if we don't open it or activate it or enable it, we cannot use it. So to actually access it or activate it, you would use different commands. And ultimately, we wanted to use the venv env allows us to activate it. So what it would do is in the command line, it would show that is an env environment. It's a virtual environment, so that way you can then install the library that you need. So this would come first, and then you would install the appropriate library and be able to write it. And in Linux, you can, or even any command line, you can actually access Python directly. So you can practice doing that. And so now when I'm done, if I wanted to exit the environment, I simply issue the command deactivate, and that would take me out of the virtual environment and bring me back to the regular command line. So I put a link here for you to look at. Please check it out for your, different commands for your operating system, their recommendation and the procedures on how to do the installation for the virtual environment in the case that you need to use it. And for a lot of the testing purposes and the simulation purposes, we wanted to use virtual environment so it doesn't impact our regular system. Okay, any question? Okay, so let's try to do the questions while we're working on going through our notes. So the first question asks you, what is the purpose of PExpect, right? You can find this from your text or your notes. So I put down that it is used for spawning child applications, controlling them, and responding to the expected pattern in their output, okay? Such that we can look for pattern like username, password, router name, switch name, IP address, etc. Okay. Then we can utilize the library to cut down the time and the work through automation, through our scripting. It can use to automate interactive applications, especially with SSH, stand for Secure Shell. Anyone know what Secure Shell does? I put it in the notes, but if you had me for CIS 25 or 27, you probably experience it, right? When we use PuTTY, right, to connect to a terminal of a system. Okay, I see some chat.
30D is the professor is making us SSH into a pie that
Awesome.
yeah, school provided.
Yeah, so it teaches you how to use SSH, and SSH is very commonly used. Yes, it can be used for remote. A lot of the time it's used for remote access purposes, but in network administration and in security administration or on, different level, what you see is we can access a certain system for testing purposes or for configuration purposes. What if you need to reconfigure the router? What if you need to reconfigure the switches? What if you need to reconfigure the server, right? It could be used for server management too, like web server, could be database. So SSH is the replacement of Telnet. We don't use Telnet anymore because it creates vulnerability and anybody can access your system at any time. We don't want that. We want a session, and we want an encrypted session. So that way your traffic is not intercepted. So here, I mentioned that you can use this to spawn an external child command. And in the case, if you get into development, you can think about, how to streamline the API process with the child, and interact with the child. So you can send lines, right? Send line it's going to stream in the characters to plug in for password or to fill out the information. So when we configure network appliances, we have to give it an IP address. We got to tell it what kind of protocols that it's going to support. We can even set route. If you have dedicated route, we can, even on the switch level, we can set up, right, how the MAC table would look like that would log all the system that would connect to the switches. So if we expect a certain type of response, we can use a built-in method from this library in order to find it. And then we can plug in the characters by using sendline or send method. Send method gives you the string to plug in, where sendline, it's going to stream in each character based on the string that's given. Okay. So here is my answer in Ultimate. So for Mencoder, this is used on a web level. Now, Mencoder is more of a legacy technology, and I will add in some more details. I will adjust your notes and add into that. Now, from an API standpoint, we wanted to integrate it for these services. So password is a service, right? In some system, it would use get pass. On the cloud level, you would see that. For the Mencoder, that's also a service for the API development. And then for the SSH and FTP, that's a service for either connecting to a certain server that's providing for remote connections, or system that we provide remote connections, or FTP for files transfer, or SCP for secure file transfer, etc. And you do see some of this being used still because some of the legacy technology is still with us. While it is not completely secure, it will do its job, and so that's why they support it. They continue to support it. Okay. The second thing we already addressed in 2, where the purpose of a PVE is that we would create a virtual or isolated installation of packages and tools that we need, so that way it doesn't impact our system or the actual package itself. And so we can use the virtual environment for testing, for building scripts, for other things outside of just, for development purposes. Okay. So PVE is explained in your notes as well. Questions? Now in the step 3 or question 3, it asks you to describe the steps on how to use virtual environment for Python. First, we need to install it, right? Like I said, look at the documentation, and you can use pip install virtual env. And it also, like I said, in Linux, right, depending on the release of Linux you're using, you might have to use additional command with that sudo apt-get install. But you have to update sometimes before you install with Linux, so you can get the latest versions of everything. Once you install it, you would then activate the virtual environment by using env commands. And it's varied between the OSs. So again, see the commands in your notes or the documentation. They do a good job in writing down the procedures on how to use it. Once you're done activating it, you can use it, right? With that, what you see is you would see it would have a parenthesis with the env next to, you know, the path that you are using. It won't be the path to C drive if you're in Windows and your username, but it would say env as in you are in the virtual environment. When you're done, you can exit by deactivating or use the deactivate command. So the purpose of this assignment is to give you the introduction to how to implement PVE, along with, you know, talk about the libraries and some of the things that we can do with the library. Now, testing the program in your systems, right? You would see that it's traceback is going to give you error because it might not support in Windows system. So we wanted to test it in the Linux system. And for me, if you're using like video conference like this along with the virtual machine and then share screen, it might be limited, but I'm going to try to run the virtual machines in the future so that way you can see how the program will work, and you can also test it on your own virtual machine as well. So before we get to the next question, let's go back to the notes. So here it talks about some of the main methods. And if you look at the documentation for this, you would see lots more, right? So PExpect, we know that it automates interactive applications, but the methods that you need to focus on is, first one is expect, how to use expect method or function, okay? The second one is send, and you can also use send line in replacement of send. So the example that's shown in the textbook, and if you look at a lot of the resources online, like the documentation, you would see that they use send line to stream in the characters for the password mainly. So it uses line feed, and this was something that they created to really work with the older systems like DOS and the Unix. So integrated some of the older method that was written to update it with the library. So this is what you would see, because you do have some legacy server that's being used. And then to be able to incorporate this library to work backwards and forward at the same time. So expect method would be used to wait for child application to return a given string. You would specify using regular expression, and this is slightly, it's different than your regular expression that you would use in Python to seek patterns. So when we say regular expression, what do we mean? We would use expression to look for digits, like numbers only, and you would use regular expression for input validation. You want only digit for phone number. You know, and Python is pretty good at giving you some of the built-in method that we talked in CIS30A, in that we would use is alpha, etc., is alnum. But regular expression is often used for input validation across programming languages, including Java, JavaScript, C++, etc. So C++ use regex, which is regular expression, right? So that allows you to match up patterns in strings that you're looking for. So for example, if I'm looking for password, right, I can have it find upper and lowercase, because in some websites you would have password with a capital P, right? Or in the example here, we would see username sometime with the uppercase U or a lowercase u. Okay, so we would expect, right, different scenario in the string or how the string is used. And once it finds it, then we can use a method like send or send line to plug in the string that we want. Okay, like a default password, which is not recommended in security scenario, but administrators still use it. So in this example, it shows you need to use child.expect, and we need to import the library in first, right? So we would import the module. So we would say import PExpect, or you can say from PExpect import asterisk, okay? So you need to have some kind of import statement. Let me open up an example so you can see. Here's a login one so you can see, okay? And here at the top, we can simply have a PExpect module and we simply import it. Or you can write from PExpect import asterisk. And this was covered when we talked about module in CIS30A, okay? Now, you notice that how we use the statement child.expect, this is defined as an object, because remember that this library have classes and we are creating an object to access the property, right? Could be members and methods, etc. So what we're doing is we're accessing spawn, right, from PExpect through that object. So what we're doing here is you can name this anything you want, but the standard way is to call this child, so that way it's a parent. But you can say C, you can call it whatever identifier that would be useful to you, okay? So in this program, what they're doing is they're defining the object here. Once we declared that we created this object, we're going to say that it's going to spawn. Now, when you run this on Windows, I'm using Windows 10 just to let you know. So I'm going to show you. It's going to throw an error because spawn is not supported in Windows. Okay, this is a Linux thing. So therefore, that's why I said to test this type of program, we would test it in a Linux release, in the Linux OS. Okay. And there are some similar method that was built for the library, like OpenSpawn, but it's not exactly equal. It's not the same. Okay. So I put here that spawn only works with Linux or Unix and will raise error in Windows. And when you read the documentation, when you get to the end, they talk about that. Okay. So now when we wanted to look for, when we're expecting a certain string like name, so you can have whatever that you wanted to expect here, specify in the string, name, username, period, asterisk, colon, question marks, whatever that would be fitting. So you can add some of the element that you would see in regular expressions, the characters that you wanted to expect there, okay? Then once it finds the name, then we wanted to stream in the characters from the string anonymous. So when it sees name on that FTP site, it's going to plug in anonymous, and most FTP sites support anonymous user. Okay. where you don't have to create the user account. But in the case that you have a login, then you can put in whatever login credential information that you have. So when we use the send line here, all that is it should be the next function or the next task after the expect. Then the second field, we are going to expect password. And in the example that's in the notes, you can have it upper and lower case where you can make it into two separate things, or you can group it together. So I can have put it in the square brace. We would have uppercase and lowercase p for password if we're expecting either or. Okay. So here we are expecting password. And in the case of password, we're going to stream in this string. And then for if we expect FTP, right, it's gonna go ahead and allow us to view the directory from OpenBSD. So it's gonna list, so it's gonna give us a list based on these directory that was set up. So it's gonna show that, okay? And then again, we would have another expect method for FTP. So this is like typing, clicking, right? But it's going to automate that step for you as far as the login. And then later on in the note, it talks about before, right? So Python 2.7, you would import expect instead of PExpect. All of this would be the same, okay? Except for this part, when you get to here, Python 3 requires you to use the print method with the parenthesis as it treats it. They update the library for that. So with Python 2.7, you simply do a print child.before, where Python 3, you would do a print parentheses child.before. And again, this is the object that we declared up here. So back over here, after it shows you some example and how it's used, we can also use it with symbols like asterisk. But be careful with using this with the asterisk because it doesn't match as much as you thought it would be, like a wildcard. No. Okay. So any star expression will match as little as possible. And so what they say is that you can also use a plus sign, like a dot plus, to return one character. Okay. Now for the before and after, those are properties. So that would allow you to set the text printed before or after with the whatever string that you set up to be expect. So you can use the child.before to print the output from the other side of the connection, what the server would see from the child, what the response would be, right? So in the case where if there's an error, so from an attacker standpoint, I'm going to take you from a perspective of the network administrator and the unauthorized user. So the network administrator, we can streamline the process doing this. From an unauthorized user, when they're pen testing your network, you can use this. You can use this to automate continuous login and look at the failed attempt with the properties. Okay, using the properties like before and after, so you can see the response from the server for that authentication process. So it's going to return what it's going to show you, what the attempts would be if it's failed. Now, from the administrator, when we do that, we want to make sure that we lock out the account after 5 failed attempts, wait, right? Because if they keep automating this with the system, it's just going to keep looping until it gets in, right? What's that? Tried and true. So it's going to keep looping. And in a lot of cases, you see some of that coming through with like cracking password tools and things like that. So a lot of the successful pen tester, right, in the field is that they come with equipped script. And so if you branch off from this into security, or when you write security application, you have to think about that, right? Input validation is part of securing your applications. And so if you understand all the aspect behind this, you can see on how you can elevate your application. You can improve the interface along with the actual, server that's supporting your services. Any question?
Yes,
Mhm.
for the script,
Yes.
there is a space after the colon in name,
Yes.
but there isn't one after password.
Yeah. So what you expect is what you include in the parameter.
So if you make a mistake, it
It
won't
will not exactly. It won't show.
show the correct before, or
Right. So if in the case where they make that field with the space, but Python is pretty good about white space. But yeah, so if you expect a white space there, you need to include a white space because the computer is going to do what you instruct it to do, right? So now when you do this, we look at it as an entire program so you can see everything that's happening. But when you script, remember that you're using shells. So a lot of the times, right, because we connect to the terminal, we're connecting to that system for that session. So you're going to issue one line at a time into shell. And so the illustration in the book, it shows you the three arrows is to indicate that we would issue this into the shell issue. And then after, it's successful, then we would run this. Otherwise, if it comes across error like your question, what will happen is you would try it with the different, another time with expect with the space or without the space, okay? With the symbol, without the symbol. Because what you're expecting is that's what it's gonna find and return, okay? Okay, any other question? Good question. So we have to think about how our expression would be for that string that we wanted to include in that parameter. Okay. And if as you work through some of the work with some of the network appliances, you're gonna see that, Cisco is gonna have this because they design the same interface for the terminal for their iOS. And then some of the older ones might have a little bit different, iteration with that on how it looks, because it's all about interface with the human and how we can automate some of that, right? Okay, so touching back on this part, the after property would be matched by the expected pattern. The match property is set to rematch the object. So we can utilize this property and you can play with it a little bit more starting this week. So here I copy and paste the program for you. Later on when the program start to be a little bit longer or when it's in shell, I actually just took a snapshot of it from either the book or the actual program itself. Okay. So this is a, if there's also FTP, then it would say get readme, and then at the end we can also say send by, etc. So you can look at how it's used. So we would issue the expect, and then after that the send line into the shell. Okay. So it gives you the explanation about the example. There are a couple of different examples. Now, this one is a little bit different than the previous one in that here's also another method, which is called the interact method. So based on this library, once you have automated the login, now you wanted to give back the control to the user, then you would use the interact method. This allows the user to now right? Be able to click and type and things like that. So if you think about the single sign-on process in a lot of the things that we do, what happens with the single sign-on is it takes your credential and it plugs your credential into other applications or other interfaces or other services, right? So it's exactly what's happening in the background with the SSO, okay? I know that RCCD uses SSO. I know that school district uses SSO. A lot of businesses still use SSO. And I just touched on this with my CIS27 class online this week. While it is very convenient and super user-friendly where they don't have to retype in their password, could possibly be wrong, but it creates vulnerability. So this method allows you to give back the control to the user so that way they can interact with the resources or the service. Okay. So as I mentioned before, you will run into spawn error if you test it in Windows environment. But with the pattern, there is some option that's similar. So for Windows, there's a popen spawn, and it's part of the popen spawn superclass. So with this, you have to incorporate the module and then to be able to use it. So it's slightly different. It would not be exactly parallel to that because, you know, OS is different. There's different features and service and components in the OS, so they couldn't exactly match it. Okay, so keep in mind, you cannot use run as well in Windows because this will also throw an error as it would not support, as it would require the pseudo terminal that only incorporated in Linux or Unix environment. So here it gives you a little bit more details about popen spawn and how spawn and run is different for Windows. So with the two special patterns that we can utilize with this library is EOF and timeouts. Timeout condition like account lockout, that happens, okay? Or end of file when we're trying to get it to read or, you know, access a certain file. So you can use these patterns that's already equipped with the library. Okay. And also incorporating the property that we talked about before and after. So the example that we see here is how we would set it up to log in a server, right? After a multiple failed attempt, the password would be rejected and it will lock us out. Okay. So this program shows us how we can incorporate the PExpect library, use the expect method and the send line, and then also be able to attempt even after it gets locked out. Okay. So we would get some response through that. So if we add, right, we can wait a certain timeout and then try again. Okay, because it's going to lock us out for, let's say 30 minutes or 60 minutes. You just have to set that in seconds and then just keep on trying. Okay, so from an unauthorized user standpoint, this is what's happening, right? They would automate this because they're not going to sit there and retype the password and click send or, you know, submit, etc. It's just going to automate it through the script. Okay. Any question with this?
Couldn't a hacker figure out your timeout if it's predictable?
Sure. It usually most web interface, it tells you how long you have to wait. Sometimes they would say approximately an hour to 24 hours, but you know, they would attempt it and they would get from the message and then they would set right? So if I see that it's 24 hours, I just convert that to seconds, and I would use that in the parameter there for timeout. Okay, any other questions? So we can use this to do a find the end of line. And I like in the documentation that they said that PExpect matching is non-greedy compared to regular expressions. So that kind of give you the difference. So you cannot look ahead as it would be stream. So when we would expect somewhere that it would be end of line, right? In the string, that would be end of line. So what we would do is we would also use symbols and so in this case it says because PExpect perform regular expression on stream, you cannot look ahead as the child process generate the stream that may not finish. So this means it's the special $sign to that what you would use in regular expression would not be useful. And the dot plus would always return no character, and the dot asterisk will match as little as possible. So keep in mind that because it's streaming the character, right, we don't know that it will be the end of line. So sometimes these symbols, right, might not be effective overall, but we wanted to match the string and predict that what could possibly be included in that string. Okay, so let's switch back to the assignment. For number 4, it says the expect method waits for the child application to return the given string. The string you specify it is a regular expression, so you match complicated patterns. Write Python statements using expect method for username, password, login interface to FTP website, ftp.openbsd.org. So here, first thing I included the top. We wanted to import the library. So we want to say import PExpect. And then like the example that I show you, we would declare the object here. We would construct the object child. So you can call it C or whatever name that you like. Then we would utilize PExpect, so and we would spawn it for FTP, and this is the service and the site. Okay, so if you have other protocol like SSH or SCP, you would specify it, and then you would specify the domain. Okay, so that will be included in the string for the parameter of spawn. Then, because it's given to us that we're using uppercase U's with the username, so that would be what would specify here. And we might expect a colon or even a space there. Okay. So we would expect username and we would expect password. So, and this is again partial, right? So we can use each of the statement with the shell. Any question with 4? I want you to practice doing this, as you know, some of you like me use Windows and you can't be on Linux virtual machine right now. So I wanted to show you how that will be written. Now, if you wanted to be more detailed with the exec method, you can do the upper lowercase like what the example has shown you in the notes in the textbook. Okay, that's fine. But here they give us, I give you the uppercase with U and P, so we can simply use that. Okay. So going back to this example, right, we would normally have an expect, a send line, or a send, expect, a send line, or a send, okay, and so forth, okay. So that way, because we're using interpreter, and so each line needs to be interpreted and used. Okay, so while we're on this, what we're gonna do is look at number 5. So we would use the send method. So it says the send method sends a string to the child process. This returns the number of bytes that's written. So you're not going to see the actual string, right? Because the method itself, the built-in method, only give you the size, right, of that storage, the bytes. If the log file is set, then the data is also written to log. You can also use the send line method, very much like send. It adds the line feed and returns the number of bytes that's written. And that's the true difference between send line and send. That send line includes the line feed, as it would be for stream. And if you read the documentation, they talk about how the interface was for the Unix system or DOS, and that needs to be included with the line feed for displaying text back in the olden days. So that was kept. So we wanted to edit the snippet that we created for 4, and we wanted to add the statements using sendline method to automate password input, given the username is janedoe@email.com and password is my pass1. Okay. Any question about what we need to do for 5? So I changed it up a little bit, where I would use from PExpect import asterisk. You can do that as well. And you can also specify the class or the method that you wanted to use. Then we would declare child as a spawn of PExpect for the FTP openbsd.org. And then we would sorry, it cuts off here. Let me move this to the next part. We would then put in our next statement, which is gonna be expect username, which is from number 4. Then the next line after that would be child.sendline, janedoe@mail.com. So we're gonna submit that username through Sendline. And then after that, we would expect password, and we're gonna stream in my pass1 for the password. Okay. And if at this point, if you wanted to give back to your user, then you can use the method to give back to the user for interaction. But, you know, this is what the assignment actually asks us. Question? So we can do an individual line on shell, right? But in the case where you see that on my Tawny, I simply just put it as a program so you can see the complete program as the example also on the website and the book itself. A lot of these websites use documentation, so go directly to documentation to read it. It helps. There are tons of example that I also included with the notes. Okay, really cool stuff.
I just have a question about the asterisk.
Sure.
Where is there what situation would it be where that for the import asterisk where that doesn't work?
Always return no character and the asterisk pattern will match as little as possible.
Oh no, I just mean in the import
Oh.
the from
Oh, yeah,
import
yeah.
asterisk.
So that was still gonna include everything, right?
Yeah, for the answer for number 5, like, is
Right.
there a situation where that doesn't work? That import asterisk doesn't work?
This is actually just a placeholder though. Like you would use it for everything else, right? If you don't know specific method name or class name, etc., method names in general functions, then you would use that. But they tell, if you look at like the module documentation, they mention that you want to, if you bringing in only method, just specify the method.
Oh, sorry. Let me be more specific. If I'm going to go off topic for a second.
Okay.
I just remember doing that for Tkinter, and I couldn't use that asterisk for like the Tkinter package.
But well, when it's buried inside and how you would use the in some of the subclass, if it's inheriting and it's buried within, then you want to include that into the import statement. Otherwise, it cannot dig deeper than what you would see in the superclass. So in the case of TK enter, going back to TK enter, what you would have is when you would use some of the components of TK enter and it's not going to be able to import that in, possibly because it's not able to find it with the actual subclass that's within that was inheriting, or if it's not specifying correctly. So did it give you an error or just give you some kind of message that it's not able to traceback? Should give you something about that, right, Michelle?
I it's been a few months.
Okay.
I can't remember.
If you have the old code or the old script, I like for you to if you can send me a screenshot of it. I wanted to see what it would look like, but in general, it should work this way, or you can specify the method there.
Okay.
Yeah.
In order for us to check this code, we have to have the Kali Linux virtual machine up and running.
No, you don't have to use Kali. You can use Ubuntu. Yeah, Spawn will only work with Linux. Because you saw how I ran the code, it's going to throw error for Spawn because run and Spawn doesn't work with Windows.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep. If you have Kali, right, make sure that you use Python 3 with Kali and then run it. You can use it through shell. Okay. All right. Now, so on page 5, it talks about pattern matching using different symbol, also how you can do CR and LF with line carriage and also with the pseudo TTY. So similar to what you've seen in regular expression, you can use this to look for, right, end of line or how it will go to the new line. And you can look for W stands for word if you work with JavaScript. When I taught JavaScript 14a, I usually touch on this. D for digit, etc. So these letters stand for specific things in regular expression, and that would be similar in this case. So you can expect word, you can expect different things for your line on how you would use it. So they show you an example here, and I pulled this from the documentation as well. So number digits alone would not satisfy for the pattern, you would need some numbers or at least one non-number at the end. So if you're looking for like 000, because if you just put in D plus like that or slash capital D plus, it would not be able to really find the number digits. So you have to specify the number or the non-number. Now, examples, there are linked to your example here. And I wanted to click on it so you can see a little bit as we still have an hour. So here are some example, and if you click on the actual link, it shows you the program. I think most of them are coming through GitHub. And there's some complex ones and there's some simple ones. So you can check them out and test them. Okay. I know some online interpreter is Linux based and, you know, it might be able to run it, but not, you know, so just to really test it, you should use virtual machine. Okay.
Would I be able to because I know for the other class we are using VS Code, but we're using code to log in into the Pi, and I know the Pi is Linux based. Would I be able to do it that way?
Yeah, Pi has terminal. You just go through the terminal. You enable the virtual environment through the terminal. That would work. You know, Pi should have the capability to install because the SSD or the SD card that you're using on the Pi is at least 8 gigs, right? Then once you enable the virtual environment, you can use the Python 3 and be able to install the packages. It should pull it regularly. And Pi comes with some IDE, it comes with idle by default. And I know that the older Jesse has Tawny and then Genie as well. So you have multiple options with IDE on Raspberry Pi. I'm familiar with Raspberry Pi because I taught classes with Raspberry Pi before, but yes, you
Okay.
can do that. As long as you can access terminal, you can do a lot. Okay. All right. So if you're looking for a Linux system, right? I simply created Ubuntu virtual machines. You can visit their websites. It shows you how you can create a bootable USB, which I made yesterday. And also before, I taught this to my CIS27 students when we were on campus. You can make virtual machine using VMware Workstation Player. Ubuntu releases their ISO. You just need the ISO and some storage, you know, at least 20 gig on your hard drive, or if you have external hard drive or USB drive, you can do that too. You know, I bought these 32 gigs USB for fairly cheap, so you can also dedicate a USB for that. It runs a little bit slower than if you have SSD inside your system, but you know, about 20 gigs is all you need, and it grows or it expands as you add more to it. And so tutorials on Ubuntu, you can also use multipass, which is a cloud environment, and then you have to log in and set it up, but it's still going to run virtual machine. So multipasses also can be implemented. So an example that we would use in Cisco is when you would set up where it would look for timeout, like 30 seconds or 5 seconds. And you can use timeout argument to specify the value here. In this case, we have 5 seconds. If you wanted 30 seconds, you just specify it as 30. And you saw earlier, if we wanted to give back the control to the user, we would use interact method. So just to give you a little bit of a glimpse on what we're going to be doing, here is. So I hope I'm able to, okay, yes, I am. Okay, so this is GNS3. This is open source simulator for network appliances and topology. So when we say topology, it is the layout on how our appliances are connected or interconnected. And you can create a project. So for example, I'm just going to do this as a demo. I will walk you more through this with the lab, but in case you wanted to test your script from now until Wednesday or this week, you can download this. I wrote instruction in the lab on how to do it, but it's pretty straightforward. You can read or watch their demo. I think they have a video, so you can do that as well. So once you install, you simply just need a desktop if you wanted to keep it super lightweight and just practice. But ideal way to really simulate a full network is to run it with a virtual machine, and you need to use either VirtualBox or VMware. So what happens is it creates a virtual machine specifically gonna link with GNS3. And when you add the appliances and enable configure the appliances, it's going to tie back to that virtual machine as a server to service those appliances. So here on the left is the built-in, except for the C3600, is the built-in appliances. If you're familiar with packet tracer, in like if you've taken CS26A, B, C at RCC, they've used packet tracer, or log in to access packet tracer on the Cisco environment. So this is similar to that, right? So let's say that if I wanted to add a computer, I just drag it in here, and then I can simulate a network. So let's say that I have a small network with 3 computers. And then I have a switch, and that's at the low level. So this is a dummy switch where it's not managed. So this is an unmanaged switch where it's just gonna switch packets or data frame back and forth for that segment. You can also incorporate cloud, and when you incorporate cloud with like network address translation protocol, stuff like that, you have to use VM. Otherwise, it would not work effectively, okay? But the next appliance I can add is a router, and on the router, you have to install them individually. There are some free ones that you can find, but GNS3, they don't release because Cisco has proprietary stuff, and they don't want to get into the legal aspect of it. So, but you do find people having, the images for the router. So basically it's an iOS image. So how do we connect? We just link it. So I'm going to go from this Ethernet to this Ethernet. It's like connecting the cable. And then this Ethernet to this Ethernet. And then this Ethernet for the third system to this Ethernet. So when it's red, it's not connected. When it's green, it's connected. But I'm not done, right? I gotta link the switch to the router. So on the router, if you ever look at a physical router, minimal ports. So you would have something like a couple ports in and 1 port out. On all the new routers, you would see that they would have fiber out, and then for the in to connecting other devices, most likely they would have fast Ethernet. And you want fast Ethernet compared to regular Ethernet because it's at a different base. So 1,000 compared to 100 base. So we would go ahead and do this here. And some routers support fiber, some don't, right? So here what happens is it's stopped. It tells me the status of it. And then if you wanted to restart this, you simply, sorry, it's hiding my play button. You just wanted to restart all the devices, right? And when it's green, we're good to go. So now what can we do when we test this, right? If on each of these, the way this software is designed, it gives you a console, okay? Think of it like terminal to all these systems. So when you open the terminal, what you can see is it's gonna give you all the terminal from my PCs to my router. Okay, sorry, it's popping off. And I configured this router as I downloaded it and I tested it, but in most cases, when you plug in a router physically, nothing is configured. It doesn't have an IP address, a name. And so this is when we can actually use PExpect, right, with Python to use it with the iOS. And when you connect to the router, you would use a computer, and most of the time it's Linux computer. You can use Windows, just have to download the iOS CLI for the terminal. Okay. I see your chat. I'm sorry. I'm going to get to it right now. Okay. So, yeah. So Patrick asked, is this like the virtual network setup? It is actually simulating. Yes. It very close to Packet Tracer or Cisco Viral. Cisco Viral is only used for Cisco equipment, but on GNS3, the cool part about this is that you can add other vendor appliances. Cisco uses their own, right? So you can use like Fortinet, you can use tons. There's so many different vendors that produce it. And the more you practice, the more you're familiar with different appliances. And sometimes you have to pay for the image because they're proprietary, but if you you can find them online and such. Okay. So when would an industry use this? To test, okay, to redesign the network or change the network. So a lot of the times when we configure the switches in the router, we don't just go and configure it. We first have to test, and you can implement policy for these appliances too. So you wanted to test that out and simulate it first, okay? And practice because you wanted to be able to practice using new equipment, right? So you can download the image for other equipment outside of what you have and be able to test it to see if it's going to fit your network and how you would be able to administer it. It is cool. I love it. I love simulator like this. I've used Packet Tracer before. My eyes just get light up with networking and security, as you can see. Okay, so this is gonna link, right? So that kind of give you a little bit of taste on what we're gonna be designing, and so it's endless possibility, right? But it comes with minimal equipment, okay? Not just to draw, but to simulate the connection. And then you can also set up NAT. And then I have created the virtual machine for this. So when I was going through it, I thought that you might not be able to set up the virtual machine, but I think I'm going to put in the option for you to make a virtual machine so you can test it, but you can add more appliances here. Okay. And if you wanted to stop, you just stop the simulation and then it's just disconnect. And then you can also change the link to it. Okay. All right. So go back. Yes, Michelle.
So if like you were saying to test, you have to test it. If you make a mistake in your script, is there a way that you can roll back, or you just have to fix the?
Oh yeah.
Can roll back?
Yes. So sorry, I have to reconnect. But anyway, you can always remove appliances. So images, think of it, image is like an image to an OS. You can download the image and then you can bring it into the simulator. The image is downloaded no matter what. You can, when you remove that appliances, it actually, you can also delete the configuration for the appliances. So let's say that you configure using your script and you don't like your configuration, you can actually wipe it. So we call that, you're familiar with hardware, so like flashing. So you can flash the device where it returns it to manufacturer setting. And so my recommendation for you guys, since some of you came from programming area and many of you haven't taken some of the advanced networking classes, but when you're working with appliances like networking appliances, read the vendor information, right? That's going to give you a lot of details. Default credential, what kind of services does it have? you know, how to configure what kind, especially with Cisco, what kind of commands do you need to use with that. And Cisco publish a lot of this publicly, and then some of the stuff, you know, they release with, you know, the manual that comes with the appliance. But the majority of the stuff you can find Cisco manual for, you know, this model of router or firewall or etc. So, you know.
Sorry, I meant like if you were you had a job as a, you know, network admin, and you made a mistake in your script and it already went out to, you know, in the network. I'm talking about that kind of mistake.
Okay. So if it's a major thing where it's time sensitive and live, I would take that system off commission and then put the backup one, the failover one on, and then fix that one. That's why you have to test before you launch the script. When you roll live, right? Because in the case where, let's say it disconnect people and none of people can log in, you just have a lot of service ticket that's going to submit, right? People going to call, they're going to send email. How come this doesn't work? And then what you have to do is to take it off commission and fix it real quick. So edit your script and run it. Okay. And it would just override. So when you're in the console, what will happen is it's just going to override the, let me see if I had to hard reset it. It will override the existing one, because at the end it's going to ask you if you wanted to save it or not, right? You wanted to save it and it stores it onto RAM. So it just override the existing data that was there. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so but you still have to take it offline.
I would, because, you know, it depends on the how severity of that situation is. But if you can leave it online and fix it and override it, if it's minimal, you can probably, but yes, you can interface with it and still keep it running, sure, right? I can edit the configuration through the terminal, through the CLI, through command line of it. Think of it like your system is running and you can change the settings in your system at the same time. Sure, you can do that, right? And then as you edit the settings, it saves it, right? So it might not take effect right away, but as soon as it's saved, most of the appliances, it requires reboot, right? Refresh in the power cycle, then it updates that. So either way, it will have to be off for, you know, the reboot process at the least. But in the major cases, yes, you need to take it off commission, fix it, and then put it back. But in the meantime, you have to have a backup one, or your network just going to be on pause, unavailable for that time. And no network is 100% available. It's like 99.99% ideally, but it's about some cases 92, 98%, because we have to service. Okay. Let's move forward. We have about 30 minutes now. So the run method can often be used instead of creating spawn instance. So instead of spawn, we can use run. And again, it doesn't work with Windows. Its form is as follows. So you would have run, and in the parameter, you would put command timeout in the case that if you wanted to state timeout, or with exit status true or false there. You can have event stated, but if you put none, that would not tie to the event, and additional criteria. Okay. So this function runs a given command, waits to finish. So this gives you the breakdown of that, then returns all the output as string. It's included. So that will be included with the output, the stderr. If the full path of the command is not given, then the path is search. Use the run to automate password input as mypass1 for FTP OpenBSD org. So again, we would use the import statement, make sure that that's there first. And then instead of using spawn, we would use run, right? if you have specified the object, then you would do a child.run. But this one, we would say run, and then we would specify the service and the website. And then for us, we are going to handle it as event. And this is in dictionary. So we would have it as the key is going to be password, and the value is my past one. Any question with that? So in place of spawn, you can use run. And in the text, the author mentioned that. And also, if you look at resources online, you will find stuff on that too, on how it's used. Okay. For number 7, it tells you, it talks about, it asks you to write the script using PExpect module for telnet on routers. There are 2, okay? Given the below information, you have the first router, it's R1GWY for router 1 gateway. IP address is 10.0.0.1. This is version 4 IP, which is still being used today, even though it's dated. Default name for most routers and Cisco appliances is Cisco, right? So, and then your router 2 is given the name. Now, this is just for exercise practice, okay? But networking, practices the real way, you would have a different subnet here, okay? Because this is a class A address and it's in the same subnet. We don't put 2 routers in the same subnet. Routers are used to separate networks or interface across different networks. So often you would see something like this, right? This is network host. This is a class A, using subnet mask 255.255.255.0. And so, or it would be something like this. That will be on a separate subnet. But, so I just use it so you can see like that. But if you want to learn about subnetting and all of that good stuff, CIS40A, and I know they teach it in Cisco series for CIS26 ABC at RCC, which is only Cisco. So here is my program. Let me open it up on Tawny so you can see clearer. Okay. So what we have is let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay. We have the import statement. You can just have import PExpect, that's fine. And then what we do is we specify, and you can see a similar example in the textbook as well. We have a dictionary called devices, and it is a nested dict. So dictionary, we would specify our routers. So what we have is we have one dictionary for one router and another dictionary for the second router. And when you're working with the terminal for the router, let me restart this so you can see. But in GNS, like this, right? If we restart this, yes. I'm gonna open this so you can see more and I'll show you the script. I wanted to go to the console. If you ever seen, and you can increase the font for this. So here's the router 1, right? it's gonna boot and it's gonna tell you like the status of the ports. Okay. Up or down, etc. And it's using my RAM, so sorry. And then on the right, it's gonna show on GSM3 that it's gonna be, you know, available or not. So once you get through all of that, in the command line for it, it's gonna show the name, its name. And by default, it's just gonna name R1, and we can change the name of it by configuring the name of it. And if you remember anything outside of this class, right, with Cisco, is that you have to enable it in order to configure it. So all Cisco devices, you have to go in and tell it enable, that means like open, and then configure. So it's taking a long time, I'm sorry. But in the program, what you're gonna get is you're gonna have it prompt and it's gonna show like this, okay? So like think about command line and terminal, it's gonna show your user account and all of that good stuff. On the router, it's gonna show the router name and the hashtag, okay? And then, you know, it will also show like IP addresses. So we are gonna expect some of that, okay? And then as we expect some of the prompt, we wanted to plug in some things. So here we have a variable called username, and it holds the string Cisco, as it tells us Cisco is the username. Password also is Cisco. And since it's in a dictionary, we need to have it loop using a for loop to iterate through the key and the values in the dictionary. So we would say for device in devices dot keys, right? Device prompt, and we wanted to we wanted to get through each of the prompt. We're gonna spawn from PExpect, and we wanted to use telnet. And in, you know, depending on the services for the protocol that's supported for these routers, they have telnet enabled. So we are going to specify telnet for the devices. Once we get through the IP with the username, we're going to stream in the username, the password, and then after that, we're going to exit. And in Cisco, you have to tell it that you exit to get out of the configuration mode. And with exit, it's going to auto save. Okay. But you do have the option in the command line to save or not save. Okay. And you have to tell it. But so in this case, what we see is we created the dictionary, and we're going to be able to log in to be able to incorporate or use the telnet service on these routers. So that way we can terminal into the router using telnet. Now, if you're using other form of service, right, like there are tons of different protocol that these routers would support, then you can specify that there. Okay. Any question? Let me check my thing. Press return. Okay, see, I don't know, it's tiny, but let me expand it. You see that? That's the router name right there. Okay, so we would do enable. I had written step for you guys to go through configure. And then we would configure where it says from terminal, memory, or network, right?
That's tiny.
I know. I need to change you can change the preference on GSN, but normally it is tiny overall in the CLI. Okay. And, you know, throughout my years, right, working with Cisco, most of the command stays the same. There are some that had changed over the years. So you got to tell it to configure in order to configure. And yes, at this point, like we should be able to use script to configure it. But, you know, manually, you got to do it line by line, right, through their CLI. So now I'm in the configuration mode, and then I can tell it like IP is this is the type of service, or my username is this. And some system would require that you you set up passwords or secret, they call it secret, before you actually configure anything else. So I'm gonna go ahead, and if I wanted to exit, I just exit and it brings me out of the configuration mode. It would take me back to the router name. Ugh, I'm trying to zoom in, but yes, you can change the preference on the GSN, which I should have done. You have any question? Let me see. Yeah, it still doesn't have the IP and the system information, so it didn't like to shut down. Okay, so that kind of give you a little bit of a preview on how to work with these. And, you know, after this class, I hope that you will get more knowledge in networking along with scripting. And then take that knowledge and going into security or even, you know, development or engineering useful. Okay. And the next class will be more fun on top of this. Okay. So the notes take you through, and it talks about how to work with SSH using PExpect. Okay. And, you know, I added some content about SSH down the line. Yeah. So here is about SSH if you're not familiar with it. And we want to use version 2 because version 1 was dated and it has issues. So if most networks, they already upgraded to version 2, but not all, we can't say 100%, right? So with the SSH2, with the revision 2, it is higher in security, and it's SSH in general is a replacement for Telnet. With the version 2, the encryption is elevated to make sure that it's protected for the session or protect privacy for the session. So in PExpect, you would use PXSSH, which is a subclass. Okay. And you simply, if you import that in, you can import in the method from PExpect for SSH only. Okay. Methods for login, logout, stuff like that with SSH. Because SSH, the way it works is like this. You have to generate a key and you're using that key in order to access. Without that key, you cannot have access through the credential. So you have to generate an RSA key, and it shows you that there. And so sometimes that can be difficult, right? I had an intern that worked for a software company that he had to do this. And, you know, they had taught him how to be able to generate the RSA key and be able to access their server to test camera system surveillance, like terrorist camera system for DoD-based contracted organization. So what happened is he had to implement that. Okay, so that kind of give you a little bit of understanding on the background of SSH. And this is how you would use PExpect with PXSSH. Okay. Now Python 2 uses raw input. Python 3 uses input. Okay. And then it also used W for file mode instead of WB for Python 2. So there's some slight difference. Okay. On the last part, for 8, it says, it asks you, what are the primary purposes of Paramiko library in Python? What is Paramiko's dependency? So in the next part of the notes, it talks about Paramiko. Paramiko is used for SSH version 2. And SSH is used for accessing remote system, managing servers, managing appliances, terminaling, and connecting to a terminal or a system. And the dependency is going to be cryptography module or library. Because SSH use encryption, you have to install and import cryptography as a module for Python. So that means that we have to do pip install cryptography, and then we need to import cryptography in our script. It needs to be used concurrently with Paramiko. So Paramiko was written specifically for low-level terminal connection, network terminal and configuration. So on top of PExpect, we can use Paramiko for SSH2. Okay. And there's some screenshot showing you that. But here is the example program. Let me find my Tani. So the complete program would look like this. And you would also use this with JSON. The author talks about how he would write these programs and how it's utilized. You would have a function to clear buffer for connection. Okay, no problem, Patrick. We'll see you next time. And then this would be the for loop. Okay, for connectivity, wait time, and this actually it allows us to output the log or the file. So you can do, remember file operation in CIS30A? Yeah, this is used here too. And then close the connection. So we established the client connection. We would connect, obtain the key, put in the credential. So here's the credential information here. And then we would invoke the shell, clear buffer, wait. Okay. And if you have the book, there's a link in the book for the author's example. You can also check out. And this is number 4 in chapter 2. Okay. So that's a little bit on Paramiko, and the notes explain more on what it support, how to install Paramiko with cryptography, and how to utilize it. For Mac OS, I want to point out that you should also install ASN1, which gives you additional options with GSS API. So if you wanted additional features with that, you should install the additional packages. Okay. All right. And then it talks about using exec command method for invoking shell, which is what you don't see in PExpect, because PExpect is really, expecting a certain pattern and be able to use some of the methods. And there are additional methods with PExpect too, but Paramiko gives you a different level of automation. Okay. All right. So Netmiko is a library that's going to be a subsidiary of the Paramiko. It actually streamlines some of the processes that you see in Paramiko. So the parent library is the Paramiko, and Netmiko works under that. So it was built out to simplify commands, because in Paramiko, when you might have to repeat some of the commands as the process is repeating. So what we can do is we can simplify it, especially when it would auto detect SSH for network appliances. So you don't have to repeatedly reissue the command. Okay. And last to the chapter is Nornir. And this is it's used for inventory and tasks with devices, because in networking, we also have to look at information for our connecting devices. This is a framework and it's used to write plugins. Okay. So I'll come back to this in a few minutes. I just wanted to show you on your notes. You can find that toward the end. So here's Netmiko information. Check out the GitHub. It gives you details on how to use it. Connect handler object. That's mainly what we were talking about earlier. And then for the Nornir, there's also a website for Nornir. And so we have some similar information with Netmiko, but in the case where if we're using something like this for our appliances, like host name, port number, username, password, and platform, we can add the plugin with Netmiko for the devices. So it's simplified or streamlined for us. Okay. So here, see how the plugins. And then after you run that, it would give you the details for how it's applied. It sends a command and so forth. So Nornir is a framework that we can utilize with Netmiko for plugins. Okay. And if you look at the tutorial video via LinkedIn, there are stuff about Napalm. There are also on YouTube too. So I highly recommend like looking at some tutorial video on Netmiko, Nornir, Napalm, and PExpect and Paramiko. Okay. So going back to our answer. So this gives you the overview, and with the lab, at least we would try to test or set it up so you can test it with your virtual machine. Okay.
So for Wednesday, you want us to have a virtual machine ready to be testing out.
If you can, at least Linux. But if you don't have a virtual machine, because I don't know every student's computer, right? Sometimes I have students that don't have enough hard drive space and they can't afford one. So just keep in mind that if you don't have a Linux virtual machine, you cannot see the script tested. You can write the script, but we're going to use GNS3. At least set up a topology, the very basic, with a couple of routers, and then be able to work with script using the simulator. And this is the free route that I'm taking you. If you wanted to invest a little bit more and get like Cisco security certifications and such, you can think about, utilizing Cisco testing simulator. So if you use Viral, like what the author is saying, it also works with Linux. So yes, you have to have a Linux virtual machine, and you can download the Viral file and then the simulator from file, and then to be able to test it with the script. Okay. Any questions? Okay. I have a few minutes left. If you don't have any question, please type in your name in the chat. I will update your great in attendance throughout this week. And thank you for attending today. If you miss, yes.
Oh, I have a question that's kind of, well, it's kind of related, but not.
Okay.
I'm trying to secure my Pi, and I changed the port in the SSHD config file. Is there any other place where I would have to change the port, you know, from 22 to like another number, so that when I SSH in, it's not using port 22?
Oh, you want to use an uncommon port?
Yes.
I don't know. Let me think. You changed the port on the Pi configuration, the settings, you mean?
Yeah, I think it was the SSHD config file.
Okay. But make sure that it understands the port number that you're using is supporting at SSH service. The reason why they're using common ports is the port number that's specified is tied to a specific service. Yeah, so for the Pi itself, as any system, even when you change that port number, you have to declare or define that port number in what type of service it's used for. So for example, I'm going to bring it to like a router, wireless router at home, right? If you're using an uncommon port, right? Like let's say for port forwarding, let's say I'm using 2000 or 8000. I have to say, there's got to be a definition somewhere in that router saying that that number is equal to this service, this protocol. Okay. I have to find that some of that information for you. Maybe there is a feature in that where you would be able to configure, but that's what I would assume for all the appliances, all the system I've worked with. You have to specify what that number means. Otherwise, it doesn't know what protocol. If not, then you have to use the common port because it ties to that service.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I'm sure you can find where it configure or how to set it sometime, even through programming. Okay. Any other questions or anything like that? Okay, yeah, so there's some study group. If you have any questions or anything, you can let me know. I'm going to be on a meeting for about 15 minutes, so I will try to be on to laptop for our office hours if you have questions.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
For this class, I'm going to use a new laptop. That CPU is 118. Do you think
is it an Intel 10th generation i7?
It's PC?
Okay.
It's PC.
Yeah, but so the processor, is it Intel or AMD? Do you know? Here, you can do it this way, okay? You would go to system information. And yeah, you can also find that there, or you can go like this, right click Windows and then go to either device manager or even computer management. All of those will also settings. It also gives you information about your system. Like I'm in settings.
Oh.
And then, yeah, so you can find out what processor. So I think you should be fine. The things that you wanted to have for this class is, you know, a system that has adequate RAM. I suggest like 16 gig is good. I'm on a 16 gig laptop right now with the 10th generation i7. Some hard drive space or solid state disk is even better. Or if you have an external USB, that's good enough. That's good. But yes, you can use a PC.
Okay, let me see setting. My setting system. I just go there, but
and click set systems, and then you
Yeah.
can find the system information.
Oh, system information. Oh, let me see system.
You can also search for it.
Yeah, I find the system.
Uh-huh.
What we can is display sound. What do we see
Storage, projector, let me see, about.
about?
So it shows me here that I'm i7. Yeah, so I'm assuming that you have an Intel based on the model number that you gave me.
Let me i7. Let me see what they gave to me. The profile, the processor.
About.
That is Intel R, Celeron, CPU.
Oh, okay. You have a
GPU.
Celeron. Okay. What's the
CPU is J3455.
okay? And the speed, gigahertz?
Gigahertz is 1.50. 1.50.
Okay, and your RAM?
RAM
Memory?
is 6.00 GB.
Okay, so it's a little bit limited. So when you run virtual machine and simulation, it's gonna be slow. Okay.
Oh,
A good way that you can look at the RAM type. So you can go to device manager or system information. You can look at the type of RAM that you have, or even search online for that model of the computer. Then you can also think about maybe buying a RAM card and then install it.
oh, that I don't do that.
Okay. Yeah. So
Okay.
I just wanted you to know that for the simulation, it uses RAM. And also for the virtual machine, it uses at least 2 to 4 gigs of RAM. So it's gonna be a little slow.
Okay.
Chris and other students can also give you some tips about installing RAM. They've taken my classes. Ray had done it. Many of them have done it. So, and I can also give you some, insights on how to do it. But it's always good to learn how to maintain and upgrade your computer.
Okay.
It's definitely doable. You can find the information in your RAM and maybe spend $20, $30 and add in more RAM, and you would have a better system. Okay. And from there on out, then you just fix your own computer. And so there we go. Okay.
Okay, so I use you need okay, this computer is okay 2.0 or 2.3. Yeah, I think because last class, last 38, I used the Mac, the Apple computer.
Okay, yeah. So you can use Apple too. Apple
Okay.
is great in that you don't have to fix a lot of things, but also the spec of your system is important all across. But yeah, so it's okay that you can use an older system. Just make sure that if you don't have the resources, what will happen is it's just going to be slower, so you have to wait a little bit.
No, I
Okay.
don't want to slow. Okay. Right now I separate a few computer to do different job. So my that somebody knows school that need speed
right
faster too, and
yeah
I don't want to make a Python class with my somebody class use the same computer.
okay.
So I separate them. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, anytime that you have questions, let me know. But I think that's okay. Anything above, with Windows 10, you have to have, like, I recommend 8 gigs at least. Okay, because it's going to be very slow once you throw a lot of applications on there and, other things that require RAM. So consider spending, like Michelle said, $20, $30 and add some RAM to your system, and you don't have to worry too much about it. Just got to make sure that anti-malwares on it, and then just, safekeeping for most part.
Yeah. Later,
Okay.
later I will learn that. Right now
Okay.
it's too busy.
All right. You're doing good though. Okay. Anything
Okay.
else?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. You guys have a wonderful afternoon if you don't have any other questions, and I'll see you next time on Wednesday. Bye. Thank you, Seth. Take care.
Oh, I
Bye.
have another question. I may go to
Sure.
your I may because for
It
the
might be a little late. I have a
not today.
meeting
I don't
between,
go today.
yeah,
Because
4:30. Okay.
For LinkedIn, actually I don't know that website. I need a little bit help about what's this.
Okay.
Okay, so I
Yeah,
go to
I'll send you a video on how to use it. They have
Okay.
a video on how to use LinkedIn Learning.
Okay. That's it. I don't go to your office hour today.
Okay. All right. I'll see you later, okay? Bye.